I hated him. That's what Rick Rude said, and he meant every word. Rick Rude never published a list of 10 wrestlers he hated. He never sat down with a pen and paper to write out their names. But his actions told the story. His interviews told the story. The people who knew him told the story. And what they reveal is darker and more personal than any list could ever capture. Rick Rude was not like other wrestlers. He came from the bars of Minneapolis. He was a bouncer. He was tough in ways most wrestlers only pretended to be. His grip could crush bones. His pain tolerance was legendary. When Rick Rude hated someone, it was not about jealousy or ego. It was about principle. It was about safety. It was about respect for the wrestling business itself. So while the list might be a myth, the hatred was real. Let me tell you about the 10 wrestlers Rick Rude could not stand and why each one earned a permanent spot on his bad side. Number 10, Masahiro Chono. Let's start with someone you might not expect. Masahiro Chono was a legend in Japan. He was tough, he was skilled, he was respected across the world. But when he stepped into the ring with Rick Rude, something went terribly wrong. In 1992, Rude and Chono met at Halloween Havoc for the NWA World Heavyweight Championship. It should have been a classic. Two talented men at the top of their game fighting for one of wrestling's most prestigious titles. But it became a disaster. The match was slow, it was awkward, it was uncomfortable to watch. Critics voted it one of the worst matches of the year. Rude blamed the booking. He blamed the restrictions placed on him by the NWA board. The board was reportedly unhappy with Rude as their champion. They wanted to distance themselves from him. They tied his hands with rules and limitations. But he also blamed Chono for not being able to adapt. The two men could not find a rhythm. Their styles clashed in the worst possible way. Chono was dealing with his own physical issues at the time. Rude was frustrated by what he saw as a lack of cooperation. Neither man could make the other look good, and for Rick Rude, that was unforgivable. You have to understand something about Rick Rude. He was a perfectionist. Every match mattered to him. Every performance was a reflection of his craft. He took pride in making every opponent look like $1 million. When that didn't happen, he felt disrespected. He felt like his craft had been insulted. He felt like his reputation was being damaged. Rude never forgot that match at Halloween Havoc. He never forgot how it made him look in front of the world. He never forgot the feeling of being trapped in a bad match with no way out. And while his hatred for Chono was not as deep or personal as it would be for others on this list, it was real. It was the hatred of a craftsman forced to create something ugly. It was the hatred of an artist whose canvas had been ruined. For Rick Rude, professional pride was everything, and Masahiro Chono had damaged that pride in a way that could never be repaired. Number 9, Bill Watts. Bill Watts was a legend in wrestling. He ran territories across the South. He was a booker with a reputation for toughness. He was respected by many in the industry. He had earned his stripes. But Rick Rude did not respect him, not even a little bit. In 1992, Bill Watts became the executive vice president of WCW. He brought his philosophy with him. He brought rules, draconian rules. He changed how things were done backstage. He implemented fines for missing shows. He tried to bring discipline to a locker room that valued freedom. But the biggest sin Bill Watts committed in Rick Rude's eyes was nepotism, pure and simple nepotism. Watts brought in his son, Eric Watts, and gave him a push immediately. Eric was green. He was inexperienced. He had not paid his dues in the territories. He had not worked in front of hostile crowds. He had not earned the respect of the locker room. But because his last name was Watts, he was given opportunities that other wrestlers had to scratch and claw for. Rick Rude hated that with a passion. He had come up through the territories the hard way. He had worked in bars where one wrong move could get you killed. He had been a bouncer dealing with drunks and troublemakers every night. He had earned every inch of respect he received. He had paid his dues in blood and sweat. And now he was watching a kid get handed everything because of who his father was. It violated everything Rude believed about the wrestling business. It violated the code that hard work should be rewarded. It violated the principle that merit should matter more than connections. Bill Watts represented everything Rude despised about the business side of wrestling. He was a man who valued politics over merit. He was a man who put his own family ahead of the locker room. He was a man who talked about toughness but enabled softness when it came to his own blood. And Rick Rude never forgave him for that. Every time he saw Bill Watts backstage, he was reminded of the corruption eating away at the business he loved. He was reminded that wrestling was becoming less about who was the best and more about who knew the right people. Number 8, Eric Watts. Eric Watts did not ask to be Bill Watts' son. He did not ask to be pushed before he was ready. He did not ask to be thrown into the deep end of the wrestling pool. But that did not matter to Rick Rude, not at first. When Eric showed up in WCW with his instant push, Rude saw red. He saw a symbol of everything wrong with the business. He saw a kid who had not earned his spot. He saw a violation of the meritocracy that should govern professional wrestling. So Rude decided to test him in the way only Rick Rude could. In the locker room, Rude confronted Eric directly. He challenged him. Some say it was to an amateur wrestling match. Others say it was to a straight-up fight. Either way, the message was clear. If Eric Watts wanted respect from the boys, he would have to earn it the hard way. He would have to prove he belonged. The locker room watched in silence. Everyone knew Rude's reputation. Everyone knew he was legitimately dangerous. His background as a bouncer was not just for show. His grip strength was legendary. His tolerance for pain was off the charts. If he wanted to hurt Eric Watts, he could, and nobody would stop him. But Eric stood his ground. He did not back down. He did not run to his father for protection. He took the abuse. He survived the encounter. He showed that while he might be green, he was not soft. He had courage even if he lacked experience. And over time, something surprising happened. Rude began to respect him. He told Eric, "I got a lot of respect for you. You've taken more than most." He saw that Eric was willing to endure the hazing. He was willing to prove himself. He was willing to earn his spot the hard way. Eventually, Rude became something of a mentor to Eric Watts. He helped him in the ring. He gave him advice. He taught him the tricks of the trade. The hatred transformed into grudging respect and then into something approaching friendship. But that respect came later. In the beginning, Eric Watts was firmly on Rick Rude's list. He was a target. He was a reminder that the business Rude loved was being corrupted by politics and family connections. He was living proof that nepotism was alive and well in professional wrestling. And for a man like Rick Rude, who believed in earning everything through hard work and toughness, that was a sin that could not be easily forgiven. Number 7, the carnival side of wrestling. This one is different. This is not about one specific person. This is about a culture, a philosophy, a way of doing business that Rick Rude despised with every fiber of his being. Wrestling has always had a carnival side. It has always existed in the gray area between reality and fiction. It has always blurred the lines in ways that make people uncomfortable. But Rick Rude believed there were boundaries that should never be crossed. There were lines that separated professional storytelling from personal exploitation. One example that particularly disgusted him was the angle involving Jake Roberts and his real-life ex-wife, Cheryl Roberts. The storyline brought their personal lives into the ring. It used real pain and real trauma for fake drama. It exploited private matters and genuine hurt for a reaction from the crowd. It took something that should have remained personal and turned it into a spectacle. Rude hated this with a passion. He believed wrestling should be about the craft. It should be about telling stories in the ring through athleticism and psychology. It should be about making the audience believe in the characters and the conflicts. It should not be about destroying real relationships for a cheap pop. It should not be about exploiting real pain for ticket sales. When he saw the business cross that line, it disgusted him. It made him feel dirty. It made him feel like he was part of something exploitative. It made him feel like he was participating in something that took advantage of people at their most vulnerable moments. This carnival mentality extended to other aspects of the business as well. The constant lying to fans about injuries, the manipulation of personal lives for storylines, the way promoters would exploit wrestlers' real problems for heat. All of it represented a side of wrestling that made Rude's skin crawl. Rick Rude wanted wrestling to be respected. He wanted it to be seen as a legitimate profession. He wanted it to be about skill and performance and storytelling. But as long as it behaved like a carnival sideshow, he knew it never would be. As long as promoters were willing to cross personal boundaries for a ratings boost, the business would never get the respect it deserved. And that broke his heart. Because Rick Rude loved professional wrestling. He loved the craft. He loved the brotherhood of the locker room. He loved the art of making people believe. But he hated what the carnival side was doing to the business he loved. Number 6, Vince McMahon. Rick Rude worked for Vince McMahon twice in his career. The first time went relatively fine. There were frustrations and political games, but nothing that created lasting animosity. The second time ended in open warfare. On November 9th, 1997, something happened that would change professional wrestling forever. At Survivor Series in Montreal, Vince McMahon orchestrated what became known as the Montreal Screwjob. He conspired with referees and other wrestlers to strip Bret Hart of the WWF Championship through deception. It was a double cross of the highest order. Luger. It was a betrayal that violated every code of the wrestling business, and Rick Rude was there to witness it all. Rude was in the locker room when Bret returned after the match. Bret was furious. He was hurt. He was betrayed. He had trusted Vince McMahon to handle the situation professionally, and instead he had been screwed in front of the world. And when Vince McMahon had the audacity to enter that locker room to explain himself, Rick Rude refused to leave Bret's side. He stood there like a silent sentinel. He was a reminder that Vince could not intimidate everyone. He was physical backup in case things got out of hand. He was a friend standing by a friend in the darkest moment, and his presence spoke volumes about what he thought of what had just happened. Rude saw the Montreal Screwjob as the ultimate violation of the wrestler's code. A promoter had lied to a performer in the ring. He had changed the finish without telling the champion. He had stolen a championship through deceit and conspiracy. It was everything Rick Rude hated about the political side of wrestling concentrated into one horrific moment. Rick Rude could not stomach it. He could not continue working for a man who would do that to one of the best wrestlers in the world. So he invoked a clause in his contract and left the WWF immediately. But he did not just quietly leave. He made a statement that would echo through wrestling history. On November 17, 1997, Rick Rude appeared on 2 different wrestling shows on the same night. He appeared on a pre-taped episode of WWF Raw's War with a full beard, and he appeared live on WCW Monday Nitro with his beard shaved off. The contrast was impossible to miss. It exposed the fact that Raw was taped while claiming to be live. It was a calculated strike at Vince McMahon. It was designed to humiliate the WWF. It was designed to show the world that their live broadcast was a lie. It was designed to prove that Vince McMahon's empire was built on deception, and it worked perfectly. Rick Rude hated Vince McMahon because Vince had betrayed the business. He had put money and control above the honor of the profession. He had proven that in his world, loyalty meant nothing. Promises meant nothing. The only thing that mattered was power and profit, and Rick Rude would never forgive that. He would never work for Vince McMahon again. He would never shake his hand again. He would never pretend that what happened in Montreal was acceptable or justified. For Rick Rude, Vince McMahon had committed the ultimate sin, and there was no coming back from that. Number 5, Lex Luger. Lex Luger had everything Rick Rude despised wrapped up in one perfectly sculpted package. He had the body, he had the look, he had the push from management. But in Rude's eyes, he had absolutely no substance underneath it all. Luger was called the total package. The name said it all. He looked like $1 million. His physique was incredible. His presence was undeniable. He was given main event after main event. He was pushed as the next big thing. He was supposed to be the successor to Hulk Hogan as the top babyface in the company. But Rick Rude saw through it all. He saw a man who was soft underneath the muscles. He saw a man who looked tough but could not back it up when things got real. He saw a creation of the gym and the supplement bottle rather than a product of legitimate toughness. The tension between them came to a head during the federal steroid trial against Vince McMahon in 1994. Rick Rude testified under oath regarding the use of anabolic steroids in the wrestling industry. He was honest about his own use. He admitted that steroids were widespread in the business. So did most people who testified. It was an open secret that everyone knew, but few would admit publicly. But the trial exposed the hypocrisy of men like Lex Luger in a way that made Rick Rude's blood boil. Luger was being pushed at that very moment as the all-American babyface. He was supposed to be clean. He was supposed to be the hero. He was being marketed as a role model for children. He was supposed to represent everything good and pure about professional wrestling. But everyone in the locker room knew the truth. Luger's body was a product of the same chemicals everyone else was using. His physique was not the result of clean living and hard work alone. It was the result of pharmaceutical enhancement, just like everyone else. But he was getting a pass from management and the media while others were being scrutinized and vilified. Rick Rude hated that hypocrisy with a burning passion. He hated that Luger's entire career was built on his physique rather than his skill. He hated that Luger was given opportunity after opportunity despite being limited in the ring. He hated that looking good was valued more than being good. But Rude also questioned Luger's fundamental toughness. And in the bars of Minneapolis, where Rude had worked as a bouncer, looking tough and being tough were two entirely different things. You could have all the muscles in the world, but if you could not handle yourself in a real confrontation, you were nothing but a pretty boy playing dress-up. Rude could knock a man out with an open-hand slap. He used that technique specifically to avoid breaking his knuckles on someone's skull. He had the scars and the stories to prove his toughness. He had been in real fights with real consequences. Luger had gym muscles and photo shoots and nothing else of substance. When they worked together in the ring, Rude would test Luger. He would work stiff with him. He would push him physically and mentally. He wanted to see if Luger could handle himself. He wanted to see if there was any real toughness underneath the polished exterior. And in Rude's estimation, Luger always fell short. He always took the easy way. He always relied on his look rather than his work. Lex Luger represented everything wrong with professional wrestling in the 1990s. He was style over substance. He was politics over merit. He was marketing over authenticity. He was the triumph of the superficial over the real. And Rick Rude could never respect that. He could never forgive a business that would value Lex Luger's look over Rick Rude's skill and toughness. Number 4, Hulk Hogan. Hulk Hogan was the biggest star professional wrestling had ever seen. He was the sun around which the entire WWF universe orbited. His face was on every magazine cover. His action figures were in every toy store. His matches headlined every major show. He was wrestling incarnate to millions of fans around the world. But Rick Rude felt burned by that sun every single day he worked in the WWF. Rude and Hogan should have had a legendary feud. On paper, it was perfect. They were both incredibly charismatic. They were both physically impressive. They were both over with the crowd in their respective roles. They both could talk. They both understood psychology. A program between Rick Rude and Hulk Hogan should have been money in the bank for the WWF, but it never happened. Not really. They had a few encounters, but never a sustained main event level program like Hogan had with Randy Savage or the Ultimate Warrior. And the reason, according to multiple industry insiders, including Bruce Pritchard, was simple and damning. Hulk Hogan did not want to work with Rick Rude. Hogan was notoriously protective of his spot at the top of the card. He had creative control written into his contract. He decided who he worked with and how the matches would go. He decided who looked strong against him and who got squashed. He decided everything. And Rude presented a unique problem that made Hogan uncomfortable. Physically, Rude was more impressive than Hogan in many ways. His body was more chiseled. His definition was better. His physique was arguably superior from a bodybuilding standpoint. And in an era where physiques mattered immensely, that created a problem for Hogan's image as the ultimate physical specimen. But more importantly, Rude was legitimately tougher than Hogan. He was a shooter. He had legitimate fighting skills. He could hurt someone if he wanted to. Everyone in the locker room knew that Rick Rude was not someone you messed with. If things got real, Rude would destroy most people in that locker room, Hogan included. In the ring, Rude's technical ability threatened to expose Hogan's limited moveset. Hogan relied on a formula that had made him millions. 5 moves of doom, a big boot, a leg drop, the Hulk up comeback. It worked perfectly for the audience he was targeting, but Rude could do so much more. His moveset was diverse. His psychology was deep. His technical skill was light years ahead of Hogan's, and Hogan knew it. He knew that working with someone as skilled as Rick Rude would make him look limited by comparison. He knew that Rude would not just lay down and take the loss without getting his heat back. He knew that Rude would demand equal footing in the program, and that was something Hogan could not allow. And Rick Rude hated him for it. He hated that Hogan's fear and insecurity kept deserving wrestlers from reaching their potential. He hated that talent took a backseat to politics. He hated that hard work and skill mattered less than creative control and backstage maneuvering. Number 3, Eric Bischoff. If Hulk Hogan represented the glass ceiling that kept Rick Rude from the main event, Eric Bischoff represented the locked door that kept him from returning to wrestling entirely. After Rick Rude's career-ending injury in 1994, he collected on a substantial disability insurance policy from Lloyd's of London. These policies were common among top-tier wrestlers in the early 1990s. They served as a hedge against the brutal physical toll of the business. The policy paid Rude somewhere between $750,000 and $1 million, which was life-changing money. But there was a catch. There was always a catch. The condition of the policy was crystal clear. If Rude ever wrestled again, he would have to pay back every single penny. The policy was for permanent disability. If he returned to the ring, the insurance company would consider it fraud and demand full repayment with interest. By 1997, the landscape of professional wrestling had shifted dramatically. The Monday Night Wars were in full swing. WCW and the WWF were locked in a battle for rating supremacy. Salaries for top talent had skyrocketed to levels previously unimaginable. Wrestlers who had been making 6 figures were now making 7. The money was flowing like never before. Rick Rude was feeling better physically. The injuries that had ended his career were healing. He was working out. He was staying in shape. He was watching his peers make millions of dollars while he sat on the sidelines. And it was eating him alive. He wanted back in the game. He wanted one more run. He wanted to cash in on the boom period. So he approached Eric Bischoff with a proposal that made perfect business sense. WCW would pay off the Lloyds of London policy, they would buy Rude out of his retirement, they would cover the insurance payout, and in return, they would get Rick Rude back in the ring. Given the money WCW was throwing around at the time, this seemed like a reasonable request. Eric Bischoff said no. The reasons for the refusal remained somewhat unclear. Maybe Bischoff was genuinely worried about Rude's long-term health and did not want to be responsible if he got hurt again. Maybe he did not want to spend that much money on a wrestler who had been out of the ring for 3 years. Maybe he thought Rude was more valuable as a manager and mouthpiece than as an active wrestler. Maybe there were insurance and liability concerns from Turner Broadcasting. But Rick Rude did not care about the reasons. He did not care about Bischoff's justifications or explanations. He saw it as a personal betrayal of the highest order, and it was made infinitely worse by the personal history between them. Eric Bischoff's wife and Rick Rude had been friends in high school. They had known each other for years. There was a personal connection there that went beyond the typical wrestler-executive relationship. There was history, there was friendship, there was a bond that should have meant something. Rude believed that Bischoff, who controlled the WCW treasury and who had the power to write checks for millions of dollars, chose to keep the door locked on him specifically. He chose to keep Rude trapped in retirement while other wrestlers were making fortunes. He had the keys to free Rude from the insurance trap, but he refused to turn them. The cruelty of this situation cannot be overstated. Eric Bischoff was not just someone Rick Rude disliked or had professional disagreements with. He was a man Rude viewed as a traitor. He was a man who had the power to help but chose not to. He was a man who put business concerns ahead of personal loyalty. He was a man who locked the door on Rick Rude's comeback and threw away the key. And that made him one of the most hated people on this entire list. Number 2, Sting. The story of Rick Rude. And Sting is one of the great tragedies of professional wrestling. It is a story of how one moment can destroy a relationship, how one decision can end a career, how one dive can turn friends into enemies. It started as a working relationship between two professionals. It ended with threats of lethal violence and a lawsuit that violated every unwritten rule of the locker room. On May 1st, 1994, Rick Rude and Sting faced each other at the Fukuoka Dome in Japan for the WCW International World Heavyweight Championship. The venue itself was unusual for a wrestling event. The ring was surrounded by a raised platform instead of being at floor level. There was a significant drop-off from the ring apron to the floor. It was a hazardous setup that posed serious risk for certain types of maneuvers. Before the match began, Rick Rude identified this hazard. He explicitly warned Sting about the danger. He told Sting not to perform his signature suicide dive over the top rope. The raised floor and the distance to the guardrails made it too dangerous. One wrong move could result in a catastrophic injury. Rude made this abundantly clear. This was not a casual suggestion. This was a direct safety request from one professional to another. Sting acknowledged the warning. He heard it, he understood it, and then, during the match, he did the dive anyway. We will never know exactly what went through Sting's mind in that moment. Maybe he got caught up in the adrenaline of the performance. Maybe he forgot about the warning in the heat of the moment. Maybe he thought he could execute it safely despite the hazard. Maybe he made a split-second decision that he would regret for the rest of his life. Rick Rude, following the most sacred code of professional wrestling, tried to catch Sting to break his fall. That is what you do. You protect your opponent no matter what. Even if they are doing something stupid or dangerous, you do everything in your power to keep them safe. That is the bond between wrestlers. That is the trust that makes the entire business work. But the momentum of Sting's dive drove Rude backward. His lower back struck the sharp edge of the raised platform. The entire kinetic energy of the collision was focused into a single point on his spine. The impact was devastating and immediate. Rude suffered severe and catastrophic injuries to his C4 and C5 vertebrae. He blew out his lower back in multiple places. His spine was damaged in ways that would never fully heal. At 35 years old, in the absolute prime of his career, in the middle of his physical peak, Rick Rude was finished as an in-ring competitor. His career was over in an instant, but the physical injury was only the beginning of the nightmare. The emotional and financial toll was far worse. Rude did not view this as a simple workplace accident or an unfortunate mistake. He viewed it as negligence of the highest order. Well, he had given Sting a direct, explicit warning about the exact move that ended his career. Sting had acknowledged that warning, and then Sting had ignored it completely. In Rude's mind, Sting had stolen his livelihood. Sting had taken away everything he had worked his entire life to achieve. Sting had ended his career through careless disregard for safety, and this perspective was compounded by what happened next. Sting continued to wrestle. He continued his career without interruption. He went on to become one of the biggest stars of the Monday Night Wars. He made millions of dollars as the face of WCW during its peak years. He had legendary matches and feuds. He was on top of the world while Rick Rude was forced to watch from the sidelines with a broken body and a broken heart. The animosity between them escalated to terrifying levels. Rick Rude filed a lawsuit against Sting and WCW. In the culture of professional wrestling, this was a shocking and unprecedented move. Lawsuits between workers were seen as a violation of the code. They were seen as breaking the sacred bond of the locker room. They were seen as airing dirty laundry in public and betraying the brotherhood. But Rude did not care about the code anymore. He did not care about unwritten rules or traditions. He cared about the fact that his career had been stolen from him. Number 1, the Ultimate Warrior. If there is one man who embodies everything Rick Rude hated about professional wrestling, it is James Hellwig, better known as the Ultimate Warrior. The animosity between these two men was foundational and philosophical. It was not just about personality clashes or backstage politics. It was about a fundamental disagreement about what professional wrestling should be. Rude was a craftsman in every sense of the word. He was a technician who took immense pride in the psychology of a match and the safety of his opponent. He subscribed to the old-school ethos that a wrestler's primary job was to make the other man look good while protecting his body from injury. He believed in the art of storytelling through wrestling. He believed in making people believe through skill and psychology rather than just flash and spectacle. The Ultimate Warrior represented the complete opposite philosophy. He was a creation of the late 1980s WWF expansion era. He was built on physique, face paint, and high-energy charisma. He was all about the entrance and the image and the intensity, but he lacked the technical vocabulary and ring awareness that Rick Rude valued above almost everything else. He did not understand psychology. He did not understand how to structure a match. He did not understand how to protect his opponent. For Rick Rude, who had paid his dues in the violent and unforgiving territory system, watching a performer with such limited skills ascend to the absolute pinnacle of the industry was a professional insult. It was a slap in the face to everything he had worked for. It was proof that the business was moving away from what made it great and toward what would eventually destroy it. Bruce Pritchard, who was a WWF executive during this era, noted that while Rude was completely professional in public, he hated the man behind the Warrior gimmick with a burning passion. He viewed Warrior as a danger to himself and everyone around him. He viewed him as someone who had no business being in a wrestling ring, let alone main eventing WrestleMania. The friction between Rude and Warrior was exacerbated by the booking dynamic of their feud over the Intercontinental Championship in 1989 and 1990. Rick Rude was tasked with carrying the Warrior through their matches. He was responsible for using his own considerable skill to cover up Warrior's limitations and construct something resembling a compelling match. The match at WrestleMania 5, where Rude won the Intercontinental title from Warrior, is often cited by historians as one of Warrior's best bouts. There is a reason for that. Rick Rude did absolutely all of the work. He called the spots. He structured the psychology. He took the bumps. He made sure the match did not fall apart into the chaos that most Warrior matches became. But this dynamic bred deep and lasting resentment in Rick Rude. He was doing all of the heavy lifting in these matches. He was doing all of the real work. He was ensuring that the matches were watchable and that both men looked strong. Meanwhile, Warrior was reaping all of the rewards. Warrior got the massive merchandise sales. He got the fan adulation and the screaming crowds. He got the main event push that would lead to him becoming WWF champion. And what did Rick Rude get? He got bruises from Warrior's stiff and careless work. Unlike Rude, who could make a punch look absolutely devastating without actually making contact, Warrior was known throughout the industry for working recklessly tight. He would actually hit people with his clotheslines. He would drop people on their heads with his gorilla press slam. He would kick and punch with full force. He was dangerous in the ring not because he was trying to hurt people, but because he did not know how to work safely. Reports from multiple sources within the WWF at the time suggest that Rick Rude grew increasingly frustrated with Warrior's stiffness and recklessness. Every time they worked together, Rude would come away with new bruises and new reasons to hate the man. Every match was a test of Rude's ability to protect himself while also trying to protect someone who did not want to be protected. Bret Hart, who was one of Rick Rude's closest friends in the business, alluded to this dynamic in his memoirs. He noted that Rude had zero tolerance for phonies, and in Rude's eyes, the Ultimate Warrior was the biggest phony in the entire wrestling business. He was a fraud who was being rewarded for everything that was wrong with the industry. The Ultimate Warrior represented style over substance. substance. He represented flash over fundamentals. He represented the dangerous trend of pushing people based on their look rather than their ability. He represented the corporate decision to value entertainment over wrestling. He represented everything that Rick Rude believed would eventually destroy the business he loved. And Rick Rude hated him for it with every fiber of his being. He hated him more than anyone else on this list. He hated him more than the people who had ended his career or stolen his opportunities. Because Warrior represented a philosophical betrayal of everything wrestling should be. The code Rick Rude lived by Rick Rude never wrote a list of 10 wrestlers he hated, but he lived that list every single day of his career. Every interaction he had, every match he worked, every backstage conversation, they all revealed his code and his values. His hatred was not born from pettiness or ego or jealousy. His hatred was born from a rigid personal code about how the wrestling business should operate. If someone was unsafe in the ring, he hated them because they endangered lives. If someone was a fraud who did not deserve their push, he hated them because they insulted everyone who earned their spot. If someone used politics instead of skill to get ahead, he hated them because they corrupted the meritocracy. If someone betrayed the bonds of the locker room, he hated them because they destroyed the trust that held everything together. Rick Rude was a bouncer who demanded order in a chaotic world. He was a craftsman who took immense pride in his work. He was an enforcer who never let a violation of the code go unpunished. He was a man who believed in earning everything through hard work and toughness and skill. The wrestling business today is very different from the one Rick Rude knew, but the lessons from his hatred remain relevant. Safety matters, merit matters, honoring your commitments matters, protecting your brothers matters. The craft matters more than the flash. Rick Rude never wrote the list. He lived it, and the locker room never forgot. Every wrestler who knew him understood what he stood for. Every wrestler who worked with him learned what he valued. Every wrestler who crossed him learned that there were consequences. His legacy is not just the matches he had or the titles he won. His legacy is the code he enforced, the standards he demanded, the line he drew between professionals and phonies. If you learned something today about one of wrestling's realest enforcers and the principles he lived by, hit like and subscribe for more stories from the dark side of professional wrestling history.